It was a bright, wind-swept morning in the small coastal town of Barrows Point. The air smelled faintly of salt and fresh-cut grass from the park where the annual memorial ceremony was held. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the field, facing a modest wooden stage draped in red, white, and blue bunting. On the far edge, beyond the official seating and shaded tents for dignitaries, a row of veterans sat in simple metal chairs, their uniforms pressed but worn from years of service and age. Somewhere near the back, almost hidden in the shadow of a tall flagpole, sat an elderly woman in a plain gray coat. Her hair was pinned neatly beneath a simple hat, her gloved hands folded in her lap. She had no medals on display, no signs that she was anyone other than a quiet guest. But her eyes, they followed every movement of the color guard with unshakable focus. The ceremony began in its usual way: speeches from local officials, a reading of names, a few awkward microphone adjustments. People clapped politely, some dabbed their eyes, others checked their phones. The local marching band played a slightly off-key version of the national anthem. And then, it happened. During the honor guard's slow procession to fold the ceremonial flag, a gust of wind caught one of the edges. A corner slipped. The soldier holding it stumbled slightly, and the fabric brushed the ground. A murmur ran through the crowd, not loud, but enough that those on stage noticed. The sergeant in charge moved quickly, but as he reached to secure the fabric, the stitching along one seam gave way. A neat but dangerous tear split the edge. The honor guard froze. Protocol dictated that a damaged flag could not be displayed. The sergeant turned to the event coordinator, who stood pale and uncertain near the stage. In front of hundreds of eyes, veterans, families, children, the flag that was meant to be raised at the ceremony's climax now hung limp, wounded. For a moment, no one moved. The band members shifted uncomfortably. A few veterans in the front row muttered quietly. The mayor leaned toward the event coordinator, whispering urgently. That was when the woman in the gray coat stood. She did not hurry. She did not wave her arms. She simply stepped forward from her place by the flagpole, walking with the calm precision of someone who had approached many problems in her life and solved them without noise. In her left hand, she carried a small cloth pouch. She moved to the sergeant, who instinctively stepped back as she extended her gloved hand. "I can fix it," she said quietly. The sergeant hesitated, glancing toward the coordinator. "Ma'am, I know exactly what this is," she interrupted, her tone neither sharp nor pleading, just certain. Something in her voice made him stop talking. Without another word, she took the folded fabric from his hands and moved toward a small bench near the base of the flagpole. From the pouch, she drew a neatly wrapped packet, a spool of heavy thread, a well-worn needle, and a small pair of scissors whose steel caught the morning light. She didn't sit right away. Instead, she ran her fingers along the torn seam, assessing the damage. The way she handled the cloth, with both respect and speed, was the first thing that made a few of the older veterans sit forward in their seats. One of them, a former Navy chief, narrowed his eyes as if trying to place her face. The crowd began to quiet. The speeches halted, the band lowered their instruments. Even the restless children seemed to sense that something unplanned, something important, was unfolding. She threaded the needle without looking up. Her movements were so practiced, so deliberate, that anyone watching could tell she had done this before, not just at kitchen tables or quiet evenings at home, but in places where precision and speed were a matter of necessity. The wind tugged at the loose edges of the flag as she began to stitch. Each pull of the thread was smooth and exact, the seam closing as if guided by memory. Around her, the field had gone utterly still. The mayor forgot his script. The photographers stopped snapping pictures. The only sound was the faint whisper of the thread sliding through fabric. And then something else happened. One by one, the veterans in the reserved seats began to rise. At first it was subtle, an older man in a faded army jacket standing slowly, hands clasped behind his back. Then another, this one in a marine dress cap, stepping forward until he stood behind her bench. Within a minute, a half-circle of veterans had formed around her, not blocking the view but framing her in silent respect. The air seemed heavier now, charged with something that couldn't be put into words. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the seagulls circling above the bay felt like they had drifted farther out, as if unwilling to intrude. She tied the final knot, snipped the thread, and smoothed the repaired seam with her palm. Then, without ceremony, she rose and handed the flag back to the sergeant. For the first time, she spoke loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "Carry it properly this time." There was no challenge in her voice, only an authority that brooked no argument. The sergeant, a man half her age and built like he could carry 2 sandbags on each shoulder, simply nodded. "Yes, ma'am." As he stepped away with the flag, the veterans behind her remained in place for a long moment before dispersing silently back to their seats. She, too, returned to her chair by the flagpole, sitting exactly as she had before, hands folded, eyes on the horizon. The ceremony resumed, but it was not the same. When the repaired flag was finally raised, the crowd's applause was louder, sharper. People didn't know why exactly, but something about the morning had shifted. Only a few noticed the way certain veterans glanced at her as they left the field. Some nodded to her in passing. A few saluted. But she gave no sign of recognition. In the days that followed, a few photographs of the moment appeared online. A woman in a gray coat stitching a flag while a semicircle of veterans stood behind her. The image began to spread quietly, shared mostly in veteran groups and small-town Facebook pages. No one knew her name. Not yet. Because what they didn't know, what would only come to light when a reporter started asking the right questions, was that the woman in the gray coat had once worn a uniform of her own. And the last time she'd sewn a flag, it had been in a place far from home, under a sky filled not with gulls, but with the roar of distant gunfire. The photograph had been circulating for 3 days when the first call came in. It was from a local radio host wanting to interview the woman who fixed the flag. She declined. By the end of the week, the mayor's office had left 3 voicemails inviting her to a community appreciation ceremony. She ignored them too. For her, the day at Barrows Point Park had been just that, a day. A flag had needed mending. She had mended it, nothing more. But the veterans who'd stood behind her that morning knew differently. They had recognized certain details, the speed, the precision, the authority in her voice. Some of them whispered among themselves afterward, wondering if she was who they thought she might be. None dared to ask her directly, not yet. It was the youngest among them, a recently retired Air Force Master Sergeant, who made the connection. He remembered a name from a long-ago briefing about a unit that technically didn't exist. He found an old grainy photograph in an online archive, a black-and-white image of a woman crouched over a field table, stitching the corner of a flag under a camouflage tarp. Her hair was darker then, but the posture, the hands, unmistakable. The caption under the photo read only, "Captain Eleanor Grace, Forward Operating Post, 1983. He sent the photo to a private veterans group. Within hours, dozens of comments confirmed it, and then, quietly, the name began to spread. 2 weeks after the park event, Barrows Point prepared for its annual air show, a small-town tradition that had grown in recent years to include a flyover by the Regional Air National Guard. The whole town turned out, lining the perimeter fence of the small airstrip, kids waving miniature flags, vendors selling cold lemonade. Eleanor sat alone again, this time near the far eastern end of the tarmac, away from the noise. She wore the same gray coat. On her lap, a neatly folded cloth pouch. She hadn't planned on attending, but an old friend, one of the veterans who'd stood behind her, had pressed her. "You should come," he'd said. "It's different this year." Halfway through the program, the announcer's voice boomed through the loudspeakers, introducing the flyover. 3 A-10 Warthogs, banking in formation over the bay, heading straight for the airfield. The crowd roared in approval. But as the planes approached for their second pass, something happened. The lead aircraft broke formation, dipping low, peeling away from the others in a slow, deliberate arc, one that took it directly toward the far eastern fence where Eleanor sat. The crowd noticed. The announcer stumbled over his words. Folks, we appear to have a slight variation to the program." The A-10 passed overhead at just 200 feet, engines throttled low so the moment was not deafened by noise. And as it passed above her, the pilot rolled slightly to the left, just enough for the sun to glint off a small decal beneath the cockpit, a single silver needle crossed with a thread. Eleanor's gloved hand rose automatically to her heart. She didn't smile, didn't wave. She simply held the gesture until the aircraft climbed back into the pattern. The air was utterly still. No chatter, no shuffling feet, not even the crinkle of snack wrappers. It was as if the entire town had inhaled and forgotten how to breathe. When the Warthogs rejoined formation, the crowd erupted into applause, not just for the planes, but for something they didn't fully understand. She thought that would be the end of it. But as the last echo of engines faded, she noticed movement near the edge of the tarmac. A group of people was walking toward her. Not quickly, not in a rush, but with purpose. They were veterans, all ages, all branches, some in partial uniform, others in civilian clothes, and at their head walked a man in a dark blue dress uniform, heavy with ribbons. He stopped in front of her chair and removed his cap. "Captain Eleanor Grace," he said, his voice carrying enough to be heard by those nearby. She looked up, surprised. It's been a long time since anyone's used that name. The man smiled faintly. "Not long enough for us to forget." One by one, the veterans formed a semicircle, just as they had in the park, but now with the entire crowd watching. The man in the blue uniform extended his hand. In it was a small wooden box. Inside lay a medal, not one given at parades, not one most people would recognize. It was a commendation awarded only in extreme circumstances for actions in theaters of war that were never meant to be discussed publicly. The crowd leaned forward, sensing the weight of the moment. The man spoke again, his voice steady. "For actions taken in 1983 in a location we still cannot name, for courage under conditions we still cannot describe, we recognize and thank you." She accepted the medal without flourish, closing the box gently. "Thank you," she said simply. And then, as if on cue, the veterans behind her came to attention. The man in blue replaced his cap, turned sharply, and saluted her. One by one, the others followed. It was then that the air went truly silent. Not a sound from the crowd, not a word from the announcer, not even the wind. Just a field full of people, watching a salute that was decades overdue. When the moment ended, Eleanor returned to her seat. She stayed until the last plane had flown, until the crowd had thinned. Only then did she stand, her gray coat catching the late afternoon light. A young girl approached hesitantly, holding a small paper flag. "Miss, are you famous?" she asked. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Not at all. I just fixed something that needed fixing." The girl looked puzzled, but accepted the answer. Eleanor walked toward the parking lot, her steps unhurried, the medal still in its box, the cloth pouch in her hand. Somewhere above, high and faint, the sound of engines marked the A-teens departing for home. She didn't look up, because she knew some things weren't meant for the sky. They were meant to stay here, in the quiet places, in the hands of those who remembered.